Welcome to 6'5 Guys. Hi, I'm Steve Lawrence.
And I'm Ed Mobley.
Every other month, we actually take a road trip to do long-distance field training instead of coming out to our normal shooting range for our weekly practice session. It's a great time, and we actually get some good training in.
Yeah, I mean, this allows us to get out into areas where we can shoot at least half a mile, if not more. It gives us exposure to wind and other environmental factors that quite frankly, we want to master and we don't normally experience. So we invite the viewers to come along and experience our latest road trip.
So we started our road trip traveling out to the area of Prescott, Washington, which is, in this particular shooting area, is just a few miles from the Jubilee Youth Ranch. Which
right,
is
yeah, right on the, yeah, it's right on the, along the Snake River.
The Snake River, yeah. But, yeah, on this trip, Kevin came with us, so it was always fun to have some shooting buddies along.
Mm-hmm.
So we ended up coming out to this location, and we have a panning shot here. Ed, maybe you can tell the folks a little bit about what we're doing up here.
Yeah, so what I wanted to show the viewer here is how the wind can come along the river, and it can create an updraft situation where it actually lifts the bullet. You actually have to compensate for that by actually coming down on your dope. And you can see how our target at 1,270 yards was right at the edge of this cliff, and it literally pushes that bullet up. And the only way you would know that is by being familiar with this particular shooting area.
Part of our strategy before we even came out on the trip was we knew, having shot at this location a few times before, that we wanted more information on what was going on with the wind. So we kind of strategically had placed a wind flag out, and there were other wind flags on some of the targets just to give us a little bit more feedback on how to make our shots or what corrections we should be making.
Right, and it did a good job showing some of the lateral wind, but you still had updrafts and downdrafts that, at least for us, were not immediately obvious. And that updraft and downdraft is clearly not happening at the target. It's happening at some point in between the shooter and the target. And you don't see it with the dust clouds there, and you didn't see it necessarily with the wind flags.
Just come down slightly.
And so this is one example of just how much of an advantage one can have if they're actually familiar with a particular area.
Absolutely. Yeah, what part of our training that we wanted to integrate in coming out to this location was reading wind, and I think we had mentioned on previous videos that where we are at, where we reside in Western Washington, it's actually difficult to train for wind because the only time we have prevailing winds is usually when a storm is coming in. Typically we go out to the range, it's a no wind situation, so it's difficult to train for that. When you're at the difference is when you come out to Eastern Washington, there usually is prevailing wind, and it's a great opportunity to train in those conditions.
Well, yeah, I mean it's a desert basically, and yeah. So from where we live, we're going almost from rainforest to desert, and even if you do have wind over on the west side, the ground is so moist you don't even see the shot.
Right.
And here, I mean, you'll see particularly these targets. They were in the shadows, and it was very, very difficult to actually call the shot.
Yeah, and I think one of the key takeaways for us was bringing the right equipment with you, and also understanding when and what limitations you have of your equipment. Even though we had a really nice Vortex, HD. Spotting scope, if the light conditions are not right, if you're actually looking into a lot of shadows, so late in the day or early in the morning, based on where the sun was at, we could either see trace or not see trace, or if it landed in dense vegetation, we would get no feedback on our misses and how to correct for it.
Right, and the time of year matters too. I mean, here we are in the fall, and that IPSC target there to the right never lit up. But during the summer, of course, the sun is more straight overhead, and it's well lit, and you can actually spot your shots. And I mean that's just one key takeaway I had, is that unless you can spot your shot you're just wasting you're
looked to
wasting
me it
bullets.
was,
Yeah,
And-
and I think you'll
lower
see as we
left
roll
quadrant
forward into
somewhere.
see more of the video. You know, we learned that at some point, if you are getting no feedback, you know, okay, you're done. let's try shooting at something else.
Yeah, it's time to move in. And also what's interesting is on this particular day, I think the spiders were out or something
See a lot
because
of spider webs.
yeah, you could see the spider webs moving from right to left, which was a nice wind indicator. You see some things moving from right to left. Actually, you see a bit of updraft there as well.
impact.
But the video camera really doesn't do it justice. In the spotting scope, we were really able to catch those spider webs moving from right to left.
Yeah.
We didn't see that on the second day, though, so that was just one of those instances where, you know, something
Yeah.
nature gave us a nice natural wind flag.
Well, and I noticed also, you know, on the day, you'll see in shooting at this far target at 1,271 yards that
That's about what it
things
was
can
like
change pretty
when I was
quickly.
shooting
Yeah, this has a pretty far reach,
Yep,
just
I'm
given the
ready.
caliber.
on glass.
And you know, it's a
Standing
great
out
opportunity
a
to
little more, so
bring this
I was
rifle
right
along
on the
because
edge.
I
would probably be
only like to shoot it when I'm
way
shooting
past
at something
330.
far.
Just hold right
But I
on.
was able to kind of quickly get onto this target and send, you know, multiple rounds down range, get multiple impacts.
Bam!
And you'll see when I got to the last shot, right,
Impact.
exact same shot, taking my time to get off a good shot, but it was a miss, and that's because the wind changed up on me.
Yeah, that's a 338 Lapua, and yeah, just a very
Yeah,
minor
right
wind
there.
change, you know, took it off. But boy, that thing just gives you a pounding. I mean, even with a suppressor, I can just see your whole body. I mean, just shaking. So trigger discipline is paramount.
Yeah, I think I ended up
Impact.
sending about 25, 30 rounds downrange on that particular weekend, and came back with a slight bruise. But yeah, it's a fun gun to shoot. Prior to coming out, one of the things we had thought about in
What
preparation for things to come out, and you know what we could learn from the wind, was how do we actually visualize the wind, right? One is wind flags. Maybe we could have brought out more wind flags. The other is,
Right
you know,
on.
maybe we put up balloons.
Yeah, I mean, like those balloons you saw at an auto dealership, we were talking about that. We were actually talking about even using smoke grenades because we had wind flags at the target and we could sense the wind where we were at, but it's clear that there's a lot of stuff happening between us and the target, and we really didn't get a good visualization of that. I mean, we saw what it was doing to the bullet.
Just low.
But as I'd mentioned before about the cobwebs and other debris kind of floating by, sometimes you could see how some of those actually got pushed upward, and that was the only visual of an updraft
Yeah.
that we were actually
Yeah.
able to see. Now, this...
One of the things I just know in this video coming up, you know, we borrowed Jake's barricade and brought that out with us
Yeah.
to shoot off, and that was a lot of fun. Just seeing how far we could get out, you know, using an improvised shooting position rather than your typical standard prone.
Right, and so there's some video here that where I'm on the barricade and I'm hitting the target at 1,270 yards. That I'd like to have played at my funeral, because I don't think I will. I mean, I was pretty happy. I mean, when you're on,
Yeah,
and
things came together.
and you
Yeah.
can just hit the target. But then, you know, I came back on that same target in what looked like, you know, very similar situations, and I couldn't hit it to save my life.
Yeah.
Which one is that? Is that
Now
the
here I
Austin
think
Flapper, or was the
you'll
one you were just shooting at?
see it that at this time of day we ended up, and also based on where I'd placed the camera, we had the ability to really see trace. So I think you'll
Right.
see a lot of good examples of us being able to spot, you know, provide corrections
right
based
behind
off the information we're
So it's
getting
off
from
the-
trace,
I
as
think
well
it's
as some of the
off the
splash.
left edge.
Well, and the trace really becomes evident in the
That would be
video
my guess.
camera. And it's also interesting as you watch the trace, you can actually see how the bullet
Right about the
is
neck
kind of
height.
pushed.
By the wind.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can see that through a spotting
lot.
scope. Sometimes you can see it, you know, through
I can
your
see the
own
trace
scope.
on that on camera.
But man,
that
I mean, you
recorded.
can really see it on video here when you play it back, because you know what to look
Impact.
for as well.
Right.
Send one more.
one of the other takeaways I had was this,
Impact.
and
Good shooting,
the
Ed.
opportunity
Nice.
to practice over the weekend was the opportunity to actually spot, right? So I
Right.
think that's one of the skills that's important, particularly as a team,
I'm still,
to actually
I'm
spot
still
for the
recording.
shooter
Yeah.
and provide
Ready.
corrections and a chance to provide or a chance to actually practice that dialogue, right?
Correct. And I learned that on sniper
Just
teams, the
off the
spotter
right.
is actually the
Elevation
more
is good.
experienced shooter. And what I also learned is
Yep.
that you can actually learn to be a better shooter by spotting. Because what you're doing
Yeah,
is
no
you're
call on
calling
that.
in a correction.
No call
And
on
by
that.
calling in the correction, you become a better shooter as you know how to call in the proper
Yeah.
correction.
Yeah, the guy in the rifle is just the monkey on the trigger.
Right, right,
Right,
exactly.
I mean, basically, it comes down, if
Impact.
the shooter is practicing the proper fundamentals of good marksmanship, right? The spotter ideally should be giving good corrections, right?
Impact.
Specifically telling
Nice.
them, what to shoot at, what corrections, come down 0.5,
Right.
push left, 0.3, whatever.
And there's some things that the spotter sees that you as a shooter don't see. And as a shooter, you just have to be disciplined and follow the directions of your spotter, because I know sometimes you think, wait a second, that can't be a good call.
Yeah.
And so you don't listen to your spotter and you still miss.
Yeah.
And then that just confuses the spotter.
And there is
Yeah.
an element of trust, and I think that's
Yeah.
why, if you're practicing to be a spotter, learn to be a good spotter. And
Right.
it does require practice, so
Low
it
left.
was good to
Just off the bottom left
get an
corner.
opportunity to do that out there as well.
Yeah, and so here on the barricade, I started in sitting, but it didn't work. So all these shots were done in kneeling, and this is just one situation where the wind and
No call.
environmentals were steady, and I loaded up a 10-round mag and got 8 out of 10 shots kneeling off a barricade on this target. Will I ever do that again? I don't know, but at least it felt pretty good here when I was able to do that. But yeah, I mean, when you're on, you're on.
Yeah. The other thing, just about spotting and gear, bringing the right gear. We had a spotting scope that had the angled eyepiece versus the straight
Oh
eyepiece.
yeah.
One of the takeaways for us was, depending on how you're using that equipment, right? So for this type of shooting, particularly in sort of tactical long range,
So, quick debrief then.
where you may be
what's your
laying
hold
down
off?
prone, where you're moving from target to target quickly versus bench rest, right, where it's kind of a stationary target. Having a straight eyepiece versus an angled eyepiece actually is an advantage.
Yeah, and because I remember, the conventional wisdom is, you want that angled eyepiece, so if you're down and prone and looking through your spotting scope, it's easier. And yeah, that might be the case if you're in prone and you're looking through a spotting scope, like, if you're doing metallic sights or NRA high power and so forth.
Right.
But in a spotting type situation, you definitely want that straight eyepiece, because then you can just look over the top of
And
that
find the
scope.
target.
Yeah, and find the target. With that angled eyepiece, we found it was very difficult.
You're
to,
sweeping the side of
Yeah.
the mountain trying to find the target, and constantly looking over to say where am I at. So
Yeah, and so here you are
Off the barricade.
off the barricade, and I've noticed you've got a technique there, crossing your arm under the rifle, that really adds to stability.
it does. It just gives me another point of contact with the rifle to add a little bit of stability. Plus, in this example here, I was using the pump pillow, which helped out. So, I was able to walk out impacts on target. I believe out to around 400 yards or the 610
Right.
before I went to a seated position.
And then here you are getting another nice shot at the bottom part of the flapper.
Yeah, takeaway here was, if the hostage flapper starts to get angled, the flappers don't actually move back.
No, they don't. They don't. So then it becomes actually a very small target. But you were hitting it. You're doing a great job.
Impact.
One of the other techniques that we learned here as well is, if you're not getting splash, you're not seeing trace, right? How do you actually get on target. And one of the techniques is to bracket. Do you want to explain that, Ed?
Yeah, I mean, I back actually in the JC Steel match in February, that we had a target. It was out 1,300 yards, something like that, and I wasn't getting any signature. And so what I did is I just moved around the corners of the target, and I just got lucky. I got lucky. I found out if I held off the lower left corner, I was hitting it. But sometimes you don't get lucky, and you can just move around that target. Like, I mean, there were situations out here where we weren't getting any feedback, and you can go through a whole magazine.
Right. But bracketing is sort of the systematic probing of, holding off the target. So, for example, you might shoot, center mass, miss. You may hold off, left edge, hold off, a couple, 0.2, 0.5 left edge, and then try the right edge, right?
Right, exactly.
And then go the other way. So it's kind of systematically working around the target to see if, somehow your dope is off based on wind or whatnot.
Well, yeah, I mean, if the wind is going right to left, you're not going to bracket off to the left.
Right.
I mean, you're not going to bracket downwind.
Yeah,
I mean,
it would not be a good way to start.
Right. So you're at least you're at least going to bracket into the wind. So at least half your possibilities are addressed.
Mm-hmm.
But what can be tricky though is elevation. Whether you got an updraft or downdraft, or maybe you had to range your target and you didn't range it exactly right.
Yep.
And then you just hope you'll get some type of feedback, but if you don't, you just have to bracket it.
Right. Now, everyone has heard the notion that wind flows like water. It basically behaves and has the same properties as water in how it interacts with objects that it impacts. Right, it'll flow up and around, take the path of least resistance. So this type of a field shooting situation, it's a great way, based on knowing the direction of the prevailing winds, to kind of visualize how that wind is interacting. What we saw here was you may have wind coming down the river and interacting with the cliffs and the hillsides, but we also noticed there was spillover of wind coming off the top and actually coming down the hill, so it actually pushed the bullets down as it was flowing downhill, but then wind that was coming up from the river would actually push your bullets up the cliff.
Right, exactly. And it was also interesting is there are little eddy currents right at the edge of the cliff. So you can place a wind flag right on the edge of the cliff, and the one that you see in the beginning of this video, that one wind flag right before the panning shot, it was really interesting to see how sometimes it would blow back and sometimes it would blow forward as you had these little eddy currents that were occurring, right at the edge of the cliff. So what that tells you is that that eddy current could just give you a false indicator.
Yeah, that's right.
Of what's going on.
Yeah.
And then we had a few situations where the wind flag at the target indicated, say, a right to left wind, but somewhere along the way
it got pushed the other direction.
Yeah, it was getting pushed the other direction.
Right.
And that's where we realized, just as a team, really good shooters know how to spot that, looking at mirage and so forth. And I mean, we've still got to figure that out. I mean, that's really, I mean, I think, based on where we live, where we don't get a lot of wind,
up on the shelf.
we've got a lot to learn.
It's a constant learning process, and I think particularly shooters that shoot in a specific location or area, my view is they probably do have a home field advantage, because knowing how wind behaves over time at different parts of the year within a specific area, if you understand that, I think it's a huge advantage. So that plus experience.
Right. And you can also see why people favor these light recoiling loads like the 6mm variants, because the less movement, the easier it is for you to spot. And
Plus less time for the wind to interact with it.
Well, exactly,
Yeah.
and so it's interesting. So when we replay our shooting through the video camera, it's really easy to see. Oh yeah, we were upper left on the target,
No
lower
call.
left, and so forth.
You're gonna get
And
where your
sometimes
gatekeeper's
you see that through your scope,
Okay.
but then a lot of times you don't.
Yeah.
I mean, you have
Because
an
you're-
idea of where you hit, but,
because you may just be
yeah.
getting back on target, through the recoil impulse, and you may have missed it.
right.
We're out to
And so, I mean,
1161 up on the Y.
I mean, personally,
Or the V.
I can control recoil well enough to where the target is always in the scope. I never lose sight of it, even at the full zoom. But I really would like to get to the point of some of those folks, where they're like, oh yeah, I was right at the left shoulder, or there was something like that.
All right.
Versus where right now I can
1270.
tell, okay, by the way the target swings, I was maybe to the left or to the right of center. But yeah, I definitely want to
Well,
get.
here's an
Moderate.
example, that we're looking at, where I guess this is you shooting here, but I
Yeah,
noticed in this
just off the
specific
left edge.
example, we both saw exactly where you were off by,
Right. So
and
this
you made the correction.
and so right there, lower left, that was easy. I just had to hold upper right corner. I mean, I didn't even have to dial any correction. And yeah, when you but a lot of times we would shoot a target, and you wouldn't get any
Yeah.
indication
Yeah.
of where you're at.
Okay, the first
Or it
shot
would
was
change,
that.
you'd like, okay,
Right.
I know what correction I need to make. Well,
Oh, that's a
the next 5
resounding
seconds while
impact,
you're
Steve.
sitting that shot, the wind changes up on you.
And your next shot.
Yeah, exactly.
I think in this example, you see me shooting through. I think for all of us, it was fairly easy for the most part. Walking out your impacts on the targets out through 895. It was the far ones,
right.
Go for the
past
lower ones,
1,000, particularly ones where you're shooting out over the water and the wind is very unpredictable.
All right.
Right.
They were really easy at some parts of the
390,
day
that little
if the wind wasn't changing up.
thing
No,
that
there
makes it very
there were at other times
Gratifying
it
noise.
seemed almost impossible to get on target or stay on target.
Right, and there was one target that out on that trip. It was that coyote target,
Yeah.
or wolf target. I don't know exactly what it was, but it was
On to 400,
really long,
onto the
but
flopper.
very narrow. And I just had a tough time with that target. I was either over that target or under that target. And what's tough is sometimes you think that you're actually under the target, but you were really
Left
over
of
the
that
target,
bucket.
and you're just seeing the bullet drop below it on the other side.
All right.
And I remember one time when one of those coyote targets was actually used in Jake's match, somebody had just mentioned the fact that be careful because you can think you're under the target, but you're actually over the
Got it?
target.
Yeah.
So,
All right, I'm zoomed in.
so that was a bit of sage advice. I mean, right here in that video, I mean, I could see that.
That
Nice.
trace.
Yeah, and I could see that it was a neck shot.
Mhm.
To 935.
So that could have easily have been a miss. But boy, when you did hit that coyote target,
Oh
the
yeah, I
noise,
think that one
Yeah.
really rang quite loudly because it's basically 3/8
Yeah, you're just
inch,
over the left shoulder,
AR
looks like.
500, and it's a 12x24, basically just hanging off of a fence
Yeah.
post on
Eh.
one of those brackets, and it made a really loud sound.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, on the second
Nice,
day,
Steve, you got it.
your cold bore shot was at that coyote.
Oh yeah, and I connected with it.
And you connected with it. I wish I had videotaped that. That would have been a really, really nice shot. But again, the way conditions change, though, is I think your second and subsequent shots, you missed it because something changed. I
Yeah.
mean, it was. But yeah, that was a darn good cold bore shot.
Yeah. We came out here. What we're looking at really is day 2, and we were only able to stay a half day because we had to hit the road to get back home. We had Jake with us, but we ended up starting our shooting day pretty early in the morning, and the direction of the sun was
Yeah, it was
particularly
horrible.
difficult.
It
we're
was
basically
horrible.
looking. If you can look and see the shadows, we're essentially looking directly in the sun.
Yeah.
And again, back to gear. We didn't have the proper sunshades. I didn't have a sunshade for my Schmidt, so you can see I basically did a field expedient
Yeah.
rigging of an ammo box, right, to serve as a
Hey,
sunshade.
it worked though. Now, I mean, hats off though to Night Force though. They include a sunshade.
Yeah,
and I
Schmidt
made,
wants to charge me $150 for theirs.
I made a lot of use of that sunshade, but yeah, with the sun like this right in your face, honestly. See, we're standing right there. I was like, you know what? I'm done with this
Yeah.
because it just wasn't fun. I mean, you couldn't see the target. It was hard to call your shots.
Yeah, especially it made a challenge almost twice as hard for the spotter because as you can see here, you're basically looking at a target that's in shade.
Right.
So you don't have that contrast from the sun, and everything's dark and obscure anyways. And kudos to whoever could spot particularly those far targets, that past 1,000. It was pretty tough in those conditions.
And I forgot my ball cap the second day, so I didn't even have a visor. I was just miserable. Just miserable. I mean, look at those shadows. I mean, the targets were all in those shadows.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there are folks out there that can spot in those situations.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it was even challenging Jake. I mean,
right. You can see he's got his hands cupped around the eyepiece here in a few instances. But here you can see me walking out impacts on target out to 935, and even that 1100 yard target, I wasn't able to connect with, as well as the 1271. Just couldn't make it happen that morning. And at some point, you realize, okay, I'm just wasting ammo.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Well, yeah, and I'm just sitting there. I'm just like, all right, I'm done. Let's go.
Okay.
Well, I tell you what, Steve, that was a lot of fun and a valuable learning experience.
It sure was, and I really look forward to coming out again in a couple of months. And a big thank you to Jake Vibert for being a fantastic host. Did a great job of setting up the targets, and he's always fun to shoot with. And appreciate Kevin coming out and joining us as well.
Exactly. Sometimes, it can be a real chore to hang out with us, so we definitely want to thank Kevin for that. And again, if you're in the market for a steel target, JC Steel, that's definitely the place to go. A great target at a great price for a great cause. Absolutely.
And remember, folks, life's an adventure.
Stay on target.